Lucy, thank you for that kind introduction. I'm delighted to be joining you, Ollie and Michael, to share our thoughts on the ecological civilization, Earth, religion, and the human future. As we prepared for this event, we noted that though the four of us come from quite different backgrounds, we share a deep love for the beauty and spirit of life, the living Earth, and humanity's potential. We agreed to each share a bit of our personal story to which we attribute that love. I was born at the end of the Great Depression. I grew up in the post-World War II era with two passions. One, a deep love of nature here in the great US Northwest in which I grew up. Two, a deep concern for the threat posed to the American way of life by the communist revolutions then sweeping the world. As a college senior at Stanford, I took a seminar on modern revolution. There I learned that the revolutions I so feared were a response to poverty. Already headed for business school, I decided to devote my life to sharing with the world's poor the secrets of US business success. Thereby, we would end poverty and the need for revolution. To that end, I went on to get MBA and PhD degrees from the Stanford Business School. And for several years, I then taught on the faculty of the Harvard Business School while working with leading business schools in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. I also advised the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations and US foreign aid missions throughout Asia and the Pacific on strategies to empower the poor. In the course of that work, I had the privilege of engaging with the wondrous diversity of the world's people, of dramatically differing cultures, economic circumstances, and ways of living. And nearly all, irrespective of whether rich or poor, were beautiful, caring people who took delight in helping and caring for a stranger. And the poorest were often the most generous. Then in the late 1980s, I had a rude awakening about my country, the United States. I realized that most US foreign policy is not driven by a commitment to spreading democracy and ending poverty. It is driven by the corporate interests of a few of the world's richest people seeking to grow their own fortunes. The result is ever-growing inequality, deprivation, and environmental devastation. I spelled it out in the book for which I'm best known, When Corporations Rule the World. The consequences are playing out in the three emergencies now disrupting the lives of every person on Earth. One, the climate emergency that results from consumption beyond what a finite Earth can sustain. Two, the pandemic that results from human disruption of nature. And three, Russia's invasion of the Ukraine on a violent competition for what remains of Earth's productive land and resources. All three emergencies result from our failure to recognize and adapt to our true nature as living beings, born of and nurtured by a finite living Earth. We organize instead as if we were financial beings for whom money can provide an endlessly growing human population with ever-growing consumption. In the resulting pursuit of money, we destroy life for financial gain, a self-destructive moral lapse that suggests a failure of our institutions of religion to which we turn for moral guidance. The barriers to corrective action are immense, and the institutional implications are breathtaking. But the ultimate barriers reside mostly in the human mind, which can quickly change. Hope lies in our ability to draw from all the many sources of human understanding to actualize our full potential as caring, creative, responsible members of Earth's community of life. Spiritual understanding has an especially significant defining role. Early human experience brought an intuitive understanding of life's interdependence that is beautifully captured by the South African concept of Ubuntu, which translates, I am because you are. Guided by this simple and essential truth, early humans self-organized as small, relatively isolated communities of people who knew, cared for, and depended on one another. Together, they created their means of living through their labor from what nature provided in their place. As the human population grew, communities found themselves competing for control of the territory on which their means of living depended. This led to organizing as competing nation states and eventually as competing transnational corporations using a combination of military, police, and economic powers to centralize control by the few of the means of living of the many. Life, by its nature, self-organizes from the bottom up as interconnected communities. Members of each community constantly adapt to local conditions to meet their own needs in ways consistent with the needs of other community members. Contemporary humans, however, organize not as self-organizing place-based communities. Rather, they organize as hierarchies of individuals competing for power to expropriate the products of the labor of nature and other people. These top-down structures limit local control and suppress local adaptation. The winners consume massive resources to maintain the structures of domination and to reward themselves with lives of opulent, ultimately dehumanizing extravagance. The overwhelming evidence of system failure drives conflict and a loss of institutional credibility. To secure our future, we must learn to live as living beings on a finite living earth. Using tools of science that were beyond the means of our ancestors, we are coming to a profoundly deeper understanding of life to which our ancestors had no access. Take our most intimate experience of life, our own body, the vessel of our individual consciousness, and the instrument of our agency. Your body and mind is comprised of 30 to 40 trillion living cells that in turn depend on the support of comparable trillions of microbial cells, including wondrously varied forms of bacteria, viruses, and fungi. Each cell makes constant decisions essential to our body's ability to serve our consciousness. And this is just one human body. Earth is a vastly larger and more complex organism. It also survives as a living being only for so long as its countless individual organisms self-organize as a living community to create and maintain the conditions of climate, pure air and water, fertile soil, and much else on which Earth's life depends. The science has discovered it did not just magically come to be. It was a difficult journey of mutual learning over some 3 to 7 billion years. During this time, life evolved from rudimentary microbes to living organisms of ever greater physical and cognitive abilities. Creation continues to unfold and life continues to learn through collaborative bottom-up self-organization. We, the human species, must learn to do the same. Our distinctive human ability to shape the future of life on Earth with conscious collective intention is a defining aspect of our distinctive nature. We have yet to acquire, however, the wisdom to use this ability responsibly. The frontiers of science are rapidly deepening our understanding of creation's extraordinary complexity and interdependence. Quantum physics tells us that relationships, not particles, are the foundation of what we experience as material reality. Biology is finding that intelligent life exists only in diverse communities of choice-making organisms that together create and maintain the conditions essential to their individual and collective existence. The social sciences are finding that the most equal human societies are the healthiest, and humans get their greatest satisfaction from caring for other living beings. For thousands of years, humans have turned to religion for our greatest understanding of creation, of our place and purpose within creation, and the ethical principles we must apply in our relations to one another and Earth. Most of our religious teachings, however, are the product of long ago times. Christianity, the faith that now claims more than 2 billion adherents, is one of the most recent of major religions. It looks to the authority of the words of a teacher named Jesus, who lived some 2,000 years ago. Earth's total population was then an estimated 300 million, mostly illiterate people. Most could communicate with one another only by meeting physically and speaking one-to-one. Neither Jesus nor any other human of that time had any means to examine creation's distant suns and planets, or the complex and ever-active, invisible inner workings of seemingly solid matter and living organisms. We are now a world of nearly 8 billion, mostly literate people with a capacity for instant communication. And we possess instruments that allow us to view previously invisible worlds. We look to outer space to observe the beginning of time. We observe the complex and dynamic worlds of subatomic particles and microorganisms. Together, these observations give us ever deeper understanding of creation and the human place within it. And yet we are also a world in deep trouble, because we organize as a now global species around a false religion posing as a science dedicated to the worship of money. This religion denies or ignores all this new learning. We call it economics. But far from being a true economics, it is an individualistic, money-centric egonomics that values life only for its market price. It ignores the most basic human needs and our responsibilities as living beings to the finite living earth community that births and nurtures us. It seems the world's authentic religions concerned with the well-being of people and earth have spoken too softly, been ignored, or abdicated their essential role in providing humanity with an ethical compass true to our nature as spiritual beings. We're in desperate need of a coming together of the world's religions, not around a new spiritual leader or religious text, but around a process of collective learning as we envision together a possible future grounded in an ethical frame consistent with traditional indigenous understanding, the best established religious teaching, and breakthrough findings on the frontiers of science. We will learn together, drawing from all our many sources of understanding, or we will join the ranks of the many failed species that once thrived, but are now extinct. Leadership in finding our way to the ecological civilization on which our future depends is not likely to come from those seated in positions of power in the establishment institutions responsible for our current crisis. Some among the establishment players may join in the cause, but the most important leadership in creating the future we seek is not likely to come from those responsible for the failure. It is far more likely to come from those who have borne the consequences of that failure. These are the people on whose labor and intelligent collaborative choice-making the thriving communities of a future ecological civilization will depend. So let us embrace our crisis as an epic opportunity. Far from calling us to sacrifice for the well-being of Earth, the emerging vision of an ecological civilization calls us to embrace our current challenge as an opportunity to actualize our human desire and potential to love and to care for one another and Earth. If we simply relieve ourselves of forms of consumption that are ultimately self-destructive, we can meet the essential material needs of all people while remaining well within Earth's limits. Most current human consumption contributes nothing to human well-being. Quite the contrary. Much of it is for war, for obsessive, frivolous consumption driven by advertising rather than need, planned obsolescence, financial speculation and cryptocurrencies that produce nothing of real value. It supports long linear supply chains that best serve corporate interests rather than circular local supply chains that secure community well-being. And it creates cities designed to accommodate cars and office space for activities best eliminated. We must rethink what I call the 3 Ps: purpose, power, and procreation. The purpose of a functioning society and a productive economy is to provide all people with material sufficiency and a spiritual abundant life experience, while supporting the well-being, beauty, and regenerative health and creative unfolding of living Earth's community of life. Societies best fulfill this purpose when power resides in communities of place that empower people to fulfill their responsibilities to and for themselves, one another, and Earth. And every society must support life's continuous regenerative procreation. This requires care for the living systems by which Earth regenerates air, water, and soils while maintaining climate stability. It requires supporting ourselves in managing our human numbers and distribution by assuring that every child is a wanted child who receives the essential support of a loving family and community. Nowhere in the relationships between members of Earth's non-human species do we find equivalents of the human institutions of money, government, business, or religion. It is humbling to acknowledge that our bodies and Earth, what they accomplish without such legal formalities. It's reassuring to recall that until recently, humans did as well. Our distinctive ability to reshape our relationships with one another and Earth resides in our ability to choose with conscious collective intention our culture, our institutions, our technology, and our infrastructure. Making the changes now needed in these choices is a very ambitious goal. And far from having the right answers in hand, we have barely begun even to ask the right questions. Yet just as we have made very bad choices, we can also make good choices. And we now have the communications tools needed to do so. Can we do it with the required speed? We will know only if we try. Let us begin with a set of guiding ethical principles guided by our best current understanding of our true nature and potential as living beings. The 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism, formalized in 1985, come to mind as a starting point. Especially Principle 1, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Principle 2, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And Principle 7, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. In the year 2000, the Earth Charter launched with its call to join together to bring forth a sustainable global society founded on respect for nature, universal human rights, economic justice, and a culture of peace. It is now endorsed by over 7,000 organizations and 50,000 individuals. Then in 2015, the Parliament of the World's Religions issued a declaration on climate change that closed with these words: "The future we embrace will be a new ecological civilization and a world of peace, justice, and sustainability, with the flourishing of the diversity of life. We will build this future as one human family within the greater Earth community." In that very same year, 2015, Pope Francis issued his Laudato Si encyclical. A product of deep study and long debate by a diverse body of Catholic thought leaders, it calls the world's people to care for one another and Earth. Then on May 25th, 2021, the Vatican launched Laudato Si Implementation Action Plan, applying the encyclical's principles of care for Earth's community of life to every aspect of church activity. Imagine this action of the Catholic Church as an inspiration and model for each of the world's religions, with UUs encouraging and facilitating the interfaith discussion. I see two defining questions as we move forward together. One, what do we truly believe about our human nature and the purpose of our existence? Two, if these beliefs are correct, what are the implications for what we must now do together? So Lucy, Ollie, Michael, you each have a long history of UU leadership, and I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on what the implications might be for UU congregations, both individually and as transformational forces within and beyond their individual communities.